sensors in both, in the heart here, the arch of the aorta, it is a sensor for the O2 concentration in the blood. So if the concentration of O2 is very low, in this case, it will give a stimuli to the bone. It will send a message to the medulla oblongata in order to stimulate more the contraction of the intercostal muscle and the diaphragm, and to increase the breathing in and out, and the rate and depth of respiration. So breathing control by two center, which is mainly the CO2 increase. When the CO2 increase in the blood, it acts directly in the medulla center by causing the drop in the pH of the CSF, and which stimulate directly the medulla center to increase the impulses to contraction of the intercostal muscle and diaphragm, contraction and relaxation in order to give more breath. So both centers are there, the sensor in the arch of the aorta, and also the level of the CO2 in the blood, which is the main stimuli for breathing. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. We will continue also with the physiology of respiration. We said at the beginning of the previous video that respiration for event. So to remind you with the respiratory for event, there are what we call it the pulmonary ventilation, so the air moves in and out of the lung, which is the breathing. The external respiration, which is the gas exchange between pulmonary blood and the alveoli. The respiratory gas transport, which is gas transported from the lung to the tissues via the blood. Then the internal respiration, which is the gas exchange between the blood and body tissues. We will come to them and explain them how they are happening. So the first portion, which is the exchange with the atmospheric air between the lung and the external air. So the air will go to the alveoli. You know that the air, the concentration of oxygen in air, it is around 21%. So we are taking more concentration of, when we breathe in, the concentration of air will be more. Then we will exhale, the concentration of oxygen, it will be around 19%. So it will go to the alveoli. Then the exchange, when the air is coming inside, in the alveoli, which is those sacs which is filling all the lung tissues, they have the capillaries around them, capillaries bed around them. So the oxygen will go from the air sac to the blood vessels. And from the blood vessels, then it will be transported to the whole body. When it reaches the tissues, the capillary side of the tissue, then there will be the exchange of between the blood and the cells for the purpose of producing ATP and also building up tissues and all the metabolic exchange. In the external respiration, the O2 movement into the blood, so O2 loading and the CO2 is moved out of the blood. So this is in the alveoli. If we took this one of those alveoli, which is similar to small balloons that contain air, and that balloons at the cover of it, or the membrane of that, it is filled of capillaries. So capillary beds are all over those sacs. So the blood is going around those sacs. So oxygen is going inside because of the difference in the concentration and the difference in the pressure. The pressure of oxygen here in the alveoli is higher. The pressure of the oxygen and concentration in the blood vessels is low. So the oxygen will leave the alveoli and went inside to the capillaries to be transferred to the body, and the carbon dioxide will come out from the capillaries blood to the alveoli in order to go with the exhaled air. So we are inhaling an air which is rich on oxygen and exhaling air which is rich in carbon dioxide. So the alveoli always have more oxygen than the blood. The oxygen moves by diffusion, so it will be diffused toward the blood vessels, toward the area of the lowest concentration, because of the lowest concentration of oxygen in the blood. So the oxygen, it will diffuse to the blood vessels. Pulmonary capillaries blood, by that they will gain oxygen in the return. So the blood which is returned from the tissues, it has a higher concentration of carbon dioxide. So the concentration of carbon dioxide is more than the air in the alveoli. Pulmonary capillaries blood will give the carbon dioxide out, and it will be going to the exhaled air. So the blood leave the lung carrying oxygenated, so it will be oxygen rich. It will be oxygenated blood, and carbon dioxide poor and ready to be pumped to the systemic circulation in order to supply the tissues with the needed amount or the demand of their oxygen in order to do the metabolism. So the oxygen transported in the blood by two-way. So in the blood, the oxygen is carried to the tissue by two-way. One of those way is most of it will be attached to the hemoglobin. So it is called oxyhemoglobin. So hemoglobin plus oxygen, which will give oxyhemoglobin, which is the HbO2. And a small amount, it will be carried dissolved in the plasma. But mostly the oxygen, it will be transferred in the blood with the hemoglobin. It will be attached to the hemoglobin, carried to the tissues, and after when it reaches the tissue, it will be released to the tissue. So this is in the pulmonary blood, the red blood cells. It will be loaded by oxygen, and here the alveoli, the carbon dioxide, it will lift the capillary to the alveolar sac, because it will come as, we will come to it as a bicarbonate, and how it, but the carbon dioxide transferred in the blood mostly as a bicarbonate. So it is transferred as a bicarbonate ions. So HCO3, which is a buffer in our body. The HCO3 ion enter the red blood cells combined with hydrogen ions, and it will form H2CO3. Then the H2CO3, which is in the blood, when it reaches the lungs, it will be dissolved to change to CO2 and water. So, and it will give CO2 and water and H2. And the CO2, it will leave the blood vessels toward the alveoli, and it will be expelled out by the expiration. So CO2 diffuse out of the blood, as we said, and a small amount of CO2 is carried inside the red blood cells on the hemoglobin. But it has also a different binding site than those used for oxygen. Because if it is used the same site of binding with oxygen, in this case, it will decrease the capacity of the hemoglobin to bind with oxygen, and by that, it will affect our ability to breathe. So this is internally the external breathing, which is happening in the lung. Then we have the internal breathing, which is the exchange of gas between the blood and the tissues, inside the tissues. It is opposite reaction to what's occur in the alveoli. So in the lung, O2 is it is opposite action to that occur in the lungs. So O2 here is unloaded from the blood to the tissues, and carbon dioxide combined with water from the carbonic acid, which is quickly dissociate from the bicarbonate. So it will be transferred back to the respiratory system. Oxygen released from the hemoglobin and diffuse quickly out of the blood into the tissues. So the oxygen, it will be released from the hemoglobin and it will be diffused to the tissues from the carboxy hemoglobin. The venous blood in systemic circulation, it will be poor in O2, rich in CO2. And it will go back to the lung in order to adjust that by giving the carbon dioxide to go out of the body and getting oxygenation from the alveoli. And this process continuously for the whole life. If it is stopped, it means that life is stopped. So the process of gas exchanges, it is continuously in our body. We'll come also to the control of respiration. What are the system which controlling our respiration? The learning objective here for is to explain the neural regulation and non-neural factors that influence respiration. What are the factors that influence respiration? If we come to the neural regulation in respiration, which is then controlled by the nervous system. So, controlled by the nervous system, we have the breathing central control, which is there in the bones and medulla center, the medulla oblongata. So those centers, they are transferring the impulse through nerve impulse, which trigger the contraction of the inspiratory muscle, the intercostal muscles, to contract and relax. And also there is the phrenic nerve that will act on the diaphragm and cause its contraction and relaxation in order to increase the capacity of the chest or decrease the capacity of the chest by the breathing in and out will happen. There is also a chemical receptors that will give a feedback to the brain, to those centers, about the level of oxygen. One of them which is in the heart. So the sensor in the aortic body of, in the arch of the aorta. So it is in the aorta, in the arch of the aorta, there is a sensor for oxygen. So when the oxygen, when the blood, so the blood, because firstly the oxygenated blood, it will be pumped through the aorta in order to be distributed to the whole body. So that sensor, it will measure the amount of oxygen within the blood. Is it within normal value or less than normal value or more than the needed value, and give a stimuli or depressant. It will give a impulse to the breathing center in the bones and medulla according to the level of oxygen. So if the oxygen level is less, in this case, stimulation of the those center will be there, and this will trigger the phrenic nerves and the nerve impulses which trigger the contraction of the inspiratory muscles or through the intercostal nerve. So the intercostal nerve and the phrenic nerve will be stimulated in order to increase the to pass the impulses and increase number of breathing and the depth of breathing. And also breathing control center are stimulated by the carbon dioxide level. The carbon dioxide level increase in the blood will act directly in the medulla oblongata by causing a drop on pH when in the CSF, in the cerebrospinal fluid, and this will give no nerve impulse from from the heart, nerve impulses from the O2 sensor, which indicate a decrease of oxygen. So both from the brain sensor are there, and CO2 sensor there, and O2 sensor in the arch of the aorta. So both when the amount of carbon dioxide is increased, the breathing center will stimulate it in order to take more breath and to give more oxygen. When the oxygen level is low, which is detected by the sensor in the aorta, in this case, also the breathing sensor will be stimulated and send the impulses to the phrenic nerve and to the intercostal nerve in order to increase the breathing, the depth, and the rate of the breathing. So, activity of respiration, respiratory muscles, the diaphragm and external intercostal, as we said, muscles is regulated by nerve impulses transmitted to them. So those muscles from the to those muscles from the brain by the phrenic and the intercostal nerve. So the intercostal nerve to the intercostal muscle, and the phrenic nerve to the diaphragm will be stimulated there. And neural center here, the breathing control center that control the rhythm, it will control the rhythm, and which is, and the rate and the depth are located in the medulla and the bones. So in those center we have a regulator for the rhythm, which is the regularity of the breathing, the rate, the number of breathing per minute, and the depth of breathing, which is how much air we are taking and getting out, which is the expansion of the lung and the contraction, the extent of contraction of diaphragm and the intercostal muscles. The breathing control center also, the medulla, which set a basic rhythm of breathing and contains the pacemaker or the self-existing inspiration center, which called the ventral respiratory groups. The bones coordinate with the medulla to smooth out respiratory rate. So both of them, they are coordinating together in order to get the normal breathing. In normal breathing, we call it the eupnea. So eupnea, it is the normal breathing. So the impulse travel along the phrenic and the intercostal nerve to stimulate the diaphragm and external intercostal muscles of respiration. The rate of respiration, the rate of breathing, it is in adult around 12 to 15 or 12 to 15 to 18. Sometimes they are considering at up to 20 per minute, respiration per minute. Both medulla and bones coordinate to maintain normal breathing. So both of them, both center are coordinating to control the breathing. Increased respiratory rate, we call it the hyperpnea. Hyperpnea, which is happened during exercise. When we are doing exercise, because when doing exercise, our muscles movement, it consume more energy, more ATP. So the demand for oxygen in order to change the nutrient to ATP, it will be more. So during exercise, we breathe more vigorously and more deeply, as the brain center send more impulses to the respiratory muscles. So it is called hyperpnea. The normal breathing, it is called again eupnea. Eupnea, it is the normal breathing. Hyperpnea, it is increase the depth and rate of breathing. The neural regulation again, we will repeat it again. So there are two things, there are the two centers that regulate the breathing. The bones, the center in the bones, and the medulla oblongata center. So both of them, they are controlling the breathing, sending their impulses through the phrenic nerve to the diaphragm and the intercostal nerve to the intercostal muscles. And we said that those are, we call them the muscle of breathing, the intercostal muscle and diaphragm. They are muscles of breathing. When they contract, they will increase the capacity of the chest. They will create more negative pressure inside the chest. So we will get more air inside our lungs. When they relax, they will make pressure over the lungs and this will expel the air out. The sensor